there's a lot of news out from Gaza and around Gaza. Let's start with this. The Lancet, British medical journal, has come out with a new report that estimates that if the war, the assault on Gaza, were to end today, that the final death toll is going to be closer to about 190,000 people in Gaza. This is going to represent 8 to 10% of the population in Gaza. And, 190,000. I mean, close to 200,000 of people in Gaza. They believe that the numbers that have been put out by the Ministry of Health, the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, cannot possibly be even remotely accurate, and is more than likely, much more than likely, a serious undercount. Now, of course, this is also what Israeli intelligence has said. Many aid organizations have said there's just no way in a country where 60 to 70% of the housing has been destroyed, where the infrastructure has been assaulted, where there is no food, there is no water on a regular basis, there's no electricity, that they could properly account. There's just an unfathomable amount of tons of buildings that have been leveled, that people are under.
And disease and
disease
starvation.
That they're anticipating.
But so don't tell that to the House, which passed on a bipartisan basis along with the appropriations bill, an effort to block the State Department from citing statistics from the Gaza Ministry of Health, because they claim it's in basically false numbers as an overcount, which is the Israeli government or AIPAC line. But this is Lancet Medical Journal. Save the Children said over 20,000 children are unaccounted for, in addition to the 16,000 we know have been killed by Israel. So just highlighting the disconnect between our representatives and what they're trying to put into our law successfully at this point, at least on the House side, and what the reality is on the ground.
This obviously is not, it's horrific. I don't know how surprising it is. Word is out now that Hamas has acceded to, newer Israeli demands. It's very hard to sort of follow what was actually a ceasefire proposal and what, but essentially saying, yes, in exchange for a ceasefire so that we can get some humanitarian aid in here, we agree that you will not stop attacking Gaza at one point, that you have an open-ended ability to wage war and don't have to enter an agreement where you will end this war. It remains to be seen if that's going to in any way influence Israel, because essentially it is quite clear that part of the agenda is to wreak as much havoc, destruction, and death in Gaza as possible. Here is a pediatrician in Gaza. This is from interviewed by Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud. This is from yesterday. We're going to do just audio only for the first 30 seconds because there's some
disturbing
graphic B-roll, and then we will cut to the actual visual.
More specific about cases that you have been dealing with since your arrival to the hospital to volunteer inside this only remaining health facilities. Like, walk us through some of the cases that are experiencing traumatizing conditions, particularly among children and women.
This is especially poignant and hard to speak about, given what happened yesterday. There was a bombing of one of the schools, and we had child after child after child get brought into the resuscitation room with different extents of traumatic injury. Standing over one child intubated with a depressed skull fracture, another with a shrapnel injury, probably 10 years old, so severe that we could see an exposed kidney and likely a transected spinal cord, trying to rush them to the OR to salvage what we could. And then in the backdrop, as a pediatrician, I see small children sitting in the corner with lesser physical traumatic injuries, but no doubt witnessing death and destruction and dying in a way that their little brains and could never be capable of coping with. And so we spoke about this briefly, but the psychological impact beyond the physical impact will be generational. And so if I go into the psychiatric understanding of epigenetics, and we talk about exposing small children with plastic brains, meaning the ability to morph and change to this level of stress, physiologic stress from adrenaline and stress hormone. You know, we sit here and we hear the hums above us of drones, which can often mean another attack is coming, and the children, they're completely aware of this, and they look up in fear and they're startled by any loud noise. The effect on the unraveling of DNA and the epigenetic research shows us and tells us that this is often permanently opened, and that the impact can even be carried generationally in their children. The trauma doesn't just happen in the 3 or 4 year olds now, it happens in their children and their children after them. And so this would take decades of therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy to try to unravel and unwrap, and the worst part is we're still in it. So there's no opportunity to deal with psychological and psychiatric trauma when we're still dealing with the physical trauma, the lack of surviving today, finding clean water, finding enough medication to survive today. So thinking about the long-term effects seems silly, except that you watch these kids' eyes, and that's all I can think about is even the ones who survive will experience trauma forever.
I mean, you heard it in his voice there, and some of course, the descriptors, but I've seen footage of a child shaking uncontrollably, hiding behind the leg of an IDF soldier as the body of a woman is behind him. I've seen footage of children's body parts, presumably mangled to the point where, I don't know, it's nearly slipping through people's hands who are holding them. I mean, I'm being graphic here, but of course, all this drama with Biden has taken up a lot of our energy and focus, but I do think they're interconnected in the sense that the White House's rudderless leadership on this front is enabling this genocide, whether it be Biden just being too old to in his perspective, or the fact that as this drama happens, perhaps you're skeptical, I don't know, but I mean, they're increasing the attacks on Gaza City, even though, and media, and I think the Israeli government is quite aware of the United States' coverage or when its attention is diverted, and some of the worst slaughters have happened over the past few days.
I mean, he's shifted now to running on his character, and his character is one of the great bloodletters of the 21st century. And I am exasperated by the media, which still covers this as if it's some sort of unintended byproduct of counterterrorism, when really this is part of the policy. Like, how many Israeli cabinet members do we need to hear say every Palestinian born is a terrorist before we understand that this is actually part of what they're intending to do?
This is not a bug. This is a feature of the program. I mean, this is it's the Brookings Foundation, a notoriously sort of centrist, maybe left-leaning only to the extent that it's like they actually do
to the left of Nixon.
To the left of Nixon, but anything that actually is just not, that is actually doing any studies is supposedly considered, left-leaning, but it's a centrist institution. I mean, genuinely centrist. They asked 750 Middle East experts to describe Israeli actions in Gaza. 41% said major war crimes akin to genocide. 34% said genocide. 16% said not akin to genocide, but still major war crimes. That's 90%. So a plurality says akin to genocide. The second largest plurality is genocide. The third largest plurality is just major war crimes. I don't know what the other 9% said.
But if you take that Lancet figure where it's up to around 189, 190,000, that's around 8% of the 2.3 million Gaza population. That's genocide.
I mean, even if it's half that.
It already was, but because of the intent, the obvious intent.
I mean, if it's up to almost 8%, that's literally almost a decimation of Palestinians.
Yeah.
Let alone the desire to also inflict upon them conditions of life that make it impossible to sustain itself. That is the destruction of Gaza is a part of that as well. So. We'll deal with this for generations. He mentions epigenetics there. That's something we've talked about here in this country. This is going to reproduce itself, and not in a good way. I mean, we talk about the generational trauma the Jewish people who experienced the Holocaust have experienced, and how that gets passed down. The generational trauma of the children of enslaved people in this country, and the people of Palestine will be experiencing the same thing, and our government is complicit in it. It's unconscionable.
CNN was allowed into Rafah for the first time since the Israeli military launched its ground assault back in was it late May?
Yeah.
May. And despite the fact that it was claimed that their operation was limited, this reporter, Jeremy Diamond, writes, and I imagine did a video thing. We haven't been able to find it. That huge swaths of Rafah are just devastated. Foreign journalists are barred from entering Gaza independently. The only access is via embeds with the Israeli military. So it is unclear what's happening with the other
CNN, by the way.
But that's what's going on there. That, of course, was Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden's red line. I personally don't think it's helpful to sort of speculate whether he forgot there was a red line or he forgot about Rafah or whatever. I mean, clearly the Biden's ideological stance on this is to allow Israel to do whatever it wants, does not see the humanity of people in Gaza at all. Palestinian people probably writ large, not at all. Whether that's a function, it may be exacerbated by his diminished capacities or not. I don't know, but this feels like it's consistent with his ideology. I mean, I definitely think that from what I've read, there's been a lot of drop off with Biden over the past 6 months. And I don't see his position 6 months ago to be dramatically different than it's been now. Let's play this clip from CNN.
Yeah. So this is inside. Either way, we all know that, like, when the older grandpa gets, sometimes his most racist views come a little bit more out as they get older. At least that's been some of my experience. Perhaps Biden's racism against Palestinians is a little bit at the forefront of his mind.
Has been given rare access to war-torn Rafah. That's a city in southern Gaza that has been ravaged by months of relentless Israeli military operations. And in this new report, CNN's Jeremy Diamond embeds with Israeli military to bring you a closer look from the front lines of the war. It's important to note, CNN reported from Gaza under Israeli Defense Forces escort at all times. CNN retained editorial control over the final report and did not submit any footage to the IDF for review.
Thick clouds of sand shroud the road to Rafah. But as the dust settles, the destruction is unmistakable. Flattened homes and bombed out buildings, Gaza's last refuge devastated by the Israeli military assault on this city.
We are now entering the third month of Israeli military operations in Rafah, and you can see all around me the kind of destruction that these last 2+ months of military operations have wrought inside of the city of Rafah. All around destruction, very similar to the kind that I've seen in central Gaza, as well as in the northern part of the Strip.
This is the first time CNN has gotten access to this devastated city. Israel and Egypt have barred journalists from Gaza, except under tightly controlled military embeds like this.
We're working in this area very, very precise, very, very accurate. Unfortunately, the destruction is one to blame, Hamas.
The Israeli military says it has killed over 900 Hamas fighters here and believes it is close to defeating the group's Rafah brigade. But the fighting is clearly not over yet. Nor is the effort to uncover Hamas's vast network of tunnels in Rafah.
This tunnel goes down over 28 meters underneath the ground,
as well as along Gaza's border with Egypt.
Right behind me here is the Egypt-Gaza border. We are now driving along what is known as the Philadelphia Corridor, a strategic corridor that the Israeli military seized 2 months ago. They say they did so because they believe Hamas was smuggling weapons across from Egypt and then from this area deeper into Gaza.
Israeli forces say they have uncovered dozens of tunnel shafts here, but cannot definitively say if any of the tunnels stretching into Egypt were operational.
we found dozens like the tunnels that you saw. And we are researching those tunnels carefully, making sure which ones were functional, which ones are not functional anymore because maybe they were, from the Egyptian side, stopped.
So will this be the last ground operation then, Rafah?
I won't say that because what you will see is when we'll have intelligence that maybe...
All right, I don't want to hear. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's a joke.
Oh, and we didn't even mention the Haaretz report from over the weekend about the fact that there's been some leaks to Haaretz that basically the IDF instructed on October 7th the soldiers who were responding to the Hamas attack to not let any cars head back into Gaza, paraphrasing a bit, but the anonymous IDF soldiers quoted basically say, well, you know, of course there's going to be hostages in those cars. This was a bit of a previously held Israeli Defense Force operating procedure called the Hannibal Directive that had been supposedly done away with because it was such a political liability.
Because it got found out.
And it got found out, meaning it's okay if you kill Israelis as long as you're showing force against Hamas
Well, don't
or
let them take
Palestinians.
hostages.
Don't let them take hostages. Kill them if need be. And then there had been long speculation that that had been the directive, or at least implicitly, on October 7th. And there's more drip from Haaretz indicating that as well.
In other words, too, I mean, it begs the question, how many of the dead on that day were ultimately killed by Israeli forces, not just in a question of a crossfire, but as a tactical measure to prevent Hamas from getting any type of leverage in any type of negotiations. So we will find out more about that later. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.